Hi, how's it going? So today we're going to go ahead and have a short lecture discussing Alison Bechdel's critically acclaimed Fun Home. So I'm going to go ahead and get my presentation queued up and you can follow along. Again, I do recommend that you have read the entire graphic novel before getting into this lecture. All right. So Alison Bechdel is, she's born in 1960 and, she's still with us today. And, she's from Beech Creek, Pennsylvania, and presently resides in Benton, Vermont. She's best known for works such as, the popular 1983 Dykes to Watch Out For. That's where the Bechdel test came from. She's also really well known for Fun Home, this graphic novel, and then later on became a Tony Award winning musical. She's still an comics educator, an active cartoonist, a comic commentator. So you can still find a lot of her works. Her more recent work, Are You My Mother, came out in 2012. Again, full-length graphic novel. So we're going to go ahead and dig into Fun Home itself. And there's a couple times where I'll stop and we'll take a look at some of the artwork as we go. But one of the things we think about is, comics is truly an exciting field, as it expands its canon to include more than just superhero genre that got things started, in the 1930s and 40s. Today, creators are taking advantage of this form to explore their own inner psychology. These writers and artists introduce readers to oftentimes disturbing visual narratives. And since the reader is directly responsible for internalizing and synthesizing action in a comic, he or she's going to be more likely to be directly engaged on a far more personal level, than I think a cinematic representation would otherwise do, where the audience simply views the film, whereas here they're a part of creating the action. Alison Bechdel's Fun Home is one such example of a graphic novel making use of comics as a means of opening a discourse about the scars family members leave on their children and on each other and on their parents. And then finding some form of closure, or attempting to find some form of closure, through sharing these stories with others. This graphic novel expertly shows how comics are moving in new directions and demonstrates a willingness to engage readers in new and challenging ways. Make no mistake about it, there are times when readers would do well to bring their literary credentials with them when pitted against Bechdel. Now, Alison Bechdel's memoir Fun Home contains many challenging experiences for readers as she unfolds the details of her life as a young girl who discovers not only that she is a lesbian, but also that her father is a closeted homosexual whose marriage to her mother proved stifling at best and downright damaging for everyone in the family. While it would be particularly relevant to analyze this book from the perspective of queer theory, and the book is certainly well suited to such a literary analysis, it's not something I'm really interested in doing at this time. This is no acquiescence to Bechdel's claim that, literary criticism is a suspect activity. She essentially subjects herself to, a form of metacriticism. This book does serve an important entry in the LGBTQI plus canon, building within the comics field. And studying it from this perspective would be a worthwhile pursuit. However, there are other less obvious aspects to Fun Home that set it apart from the rest, things that the readers need to be aware of. And I'd like to touch on just a few of them right now. It's really interesting to note how this novel engages readers in a serious discussion of the ways in which our parents can scar us. While Bruce Bechdel is shown to have an explosive temper and to be prone toward the occasional violent outburst, it's the distance he creates in the household that seems to cause the most harm. And I quote, "It was a vicious circle, though. The more gratification we found in our own geniuses, the more isolated we grew. And in this isolation, our creativity took on an aspect of compulsion." And as you can see in the artwork, this is a family under one house, and yet they all exist and live inside their own respective bubbles, different floors, barely even next to each other. And this is where the comic art can show that separation so brilliantly. Bechdel then goes on to show the period of time in which her obsessive compulsive disorder took a hold of her as a sort of coping mechanism for the underlying tensions in the home. The response from her mother is a cool tone, as Bechdel's representation of her mother is with a pursed mouth, sideways glances, and body positioning that has her leaning away from young Alison, all indicative of someone who is unable or unwilling to physically make contact with her own daughter. This is confirmed one page earlier when Bechdel informs her readers that while she takes compulsive turns in kissing her stuffed animals, no one had kissed her goodnight in years. Furthermore, one need only look, at lost my thought there. uh, you know, One will need to look at the typical expressions that the Bechdels use. They're often very pensive. They have small dots for their mouths, reflecting tightened lips. Their eyebrows are very pensive um, and furrowed deep in thought or lifted upwards as if they're anxious. At the risk of appealing to cliche, the adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words, truly finds meaning in this book. Bechdel's art makes full use of image to convey emotion and feeling in each member of her broken family. And at initial glance, Bechdel's art might not appear to possess the ultra-realistic style, one might find with more commercially successful comic artists like Jim Lee or Alex Ross. However, Bechdel clearly makes use of that style to suit her respective purpose. In most panels, the readers encounter a more cartoon-like style, and it's effective because it really serves two purposes, universality and subversion. With regards to universality, Bechdel makes use of the notion that Scott McCloud discusses in his formalist text, Understanding Comics, when he explains the difference between the iconic simple art and the complex realistic art. Where the former allows the reader to reconfigure the lines in his or her own imagination, thereby encouraging greater self-identification with the subject of the art. Bechdel draws readers into her story, with her simple but not simplistic art. Again, McCloud astutely, points out that there's, and I quote, a simple style does not constitute or necessitate a simple story. And this leads into Bechdel's second purpose in her choice of style, where she subverts reader expectations. Readers who look at the body of Bechdel's artwork and fail to give her credit as a skilled artist equally fail to recognize some of the most poignant moments in the novel. Bechdel's detailed photographic sketches are used sparingly in Fun Home, dividing each chapter with a depiction from a moment from her life, in addition to the double-page spread of her father's young lover and Bechdel's babysitter, Roy. These images eschew the cartoonish style employed throughout the bulk of the graphic novel for a very clear purpose. Each image seems to convey a very specific emotion that's carried throughout the given chapter and the story as a whole. Now, in the opening chapter, we see an image of a younger Bruce Bechdel that is both sexual and masculine. Yet there's also a longing in his eye as he stands at a doorway to some unknown place. New to the story, most readers won't think much of this picture and begin immediately reading about the stern and polished, looking man on the next page. But after reading Fun Home, you flip back, you look at these images in the dividers, and they take on new meaning. The lack of polish which Bechdel depicts her father seems to indicate Bruce as he may have been, or wanted to be, apart from his family and the imposing role of being the heterosexual patriarch that everyone saw. Even in chapter 4's dividing page, the image Bechdel produces of her father in this woman's bathing suit is a beautiful one. What reader would have expected this was Bruce Bechdel before the start of the chapter? How many were fooled into thinking this is an image of the innocent and beautiful Helen Bechdel, only to discover it's the innocent and beautiful Bruce? Certainly, Bechdel's awareness of the mutability of identity and the performance of identity that comes out here in this image. But more significant than being an opportunity to engage queer theory is that Bechdel highlights the scars Bruce must have inflicted on himself when we look upon his past inner self and compare it to what we see of him up to this point in the story. Readers might not agree with or be comfortable with a lifestyle of transgender, yet no one can deny the fact that Bruce is no longer the innocent person that he was in the picture Bechdel painfully and yet beautifully renders. Now, each of these pictures contains, elements of beauty, longing, nostalgia, regret, and hope. The picture of Roy carefully depicts, the beauty of the photograph that Bruce composed and took, a sort of David for the Appalachian Michelangelo that will never truly be realized because it would out him as being not only a homosexual and an adulterer, but also possibly a pedophile, considering how young an age Roy was. And yet, the most painful picture is the one readers encounter at the very close of the story. When we look at the dividing picture for the chapter 7 with a young girl preparing to jump into the arms of her father. The action is suspended, and unlike a movie or traditional text that would deliver resolution to the reader, Alison and Bruce will remain forever locked in stasis, apart from one another, locked in an eternal jump without ever reaching each other. Perhaps this interpretation comes across as a little heavy-handed, maybe a little cynical. And yet, it's interesting to note that while Bechdel thanks her mother and 2 brothers twice, nowhere does she make any reference to her father. Fun Home appears to be Bechdel attempting to reach closure with her father, but as painstaking details, of her and her father in these images suggest, there still is an unresolved space between the 2 people. Despite her claim in the final panel that he was there to catch me when I leapt, we hear her what she says, but we see her showing something else. He might have caught her, but it's not an image Bechdel allows us to witness. And I'm not sure we can trust her words when her images don't completely match up. Finally, it's worth noting that readers who don't carry a certain literary background may find themselves somewhat confused and left out at times. Bechdel makes many literary allusions to Hemingway, Faulkner, and especially Joyce, who serves as the primary vehicle, for the closing chapter of Fun Home. Furthermore, readers bringing stereotypical preconceptions about comic books as being the stuff of kids, they're going to be sorely mistaken at the complexity, the vocabulary and philosophy that Bechdel deftly weaves into her memoir. And although each reader's reaction to a novel is often nuanced, I believe there are 3 common responses to, this use of complicated vocabulary, philosophy, and intertextual referencing. First, I think readers from an academic background may find themselves in familiar territory and be well equipped to travel the diverse and difficult territory Bechdel lays before them. Second, maybe more casual readers could be turned off from the continual and unfamiliar references and complexities in Fun Home, making the title something of a misnomer. These 2 responses would seem to be fairly common, yet there's a third response that I suspect underscores the very response Bechdel had in interacting with her father when she was younger. And it's this response Bechdel aims to elicit from her readers that highlights the sophisticated level that Fun Home operates at. She's doing more than simply trying really hard to act serious for literary critics. She elevates form to elicit the emotional response from her readers, similar to that which her father continually evoked from her: distance. Had Bechdel simply employed these academic trappings unconsciously, it would probably come off as a little pretentious and ostentatious in nature. I argue, however, that we should consider the fact that she consciously uses these words and concepts to create space at times between the reader and herself in ways that are not dissimilar from the ways in which her father distanced himself from his family through his academic nature. The third response, then, is to become more aware of this distancing and relate to Bechdel on an intimate level. Further, Bechdel's inconsistent adoption of this style suggests that it's not necessarily natural to her, though she becomes very adept at it by the end of the novel, paralleling her Ithaca moment, the final pages of the last chapter. Clearly, they grew closer when she adopts his language. And as seen during their discussion of literature when she's a student in his class and in her college English courses, she says, "Dad didn't have much use for small children, but as I got older, he began to sense my potential as an intellectual companion." She goes on to reinforce, the learned nature of her father's language when she tells the reader, we grew even closer after I went away to college. Books, the ones, assigned for my English class, continued to serve as our currency. And yet Bruce goes on too far, as she says, quote, "His excitement left little room," end quote, for true discourse with his daughter. It's a subtle point, but one that disaffected readers should not overlook. Bechdel does not allow herself to become overly obtuse in her literary references and complex, terminology, because it was an unpleasant experience that she went through with her own father. Through experiencing the occasional distance she places between the reader and herself, we experience the scars she bears. However, she does not impose the full separation from author to reader as her father did with her when he indulged in his intellectual pursuits, while failing to think about whether he lost his daughter in the process. In this regard, readers might feel confused at times, but Bechdel, our kind of literary parent figure through her role as storyteller, does not wholly abandon us. Looking at other, comparable, peers, I would say Fun Home, like, Chris Ware's Jimmy Corrigan, The World's Smartest Kid, and David Small's Stitches. Fun Home is an exceptionally complex graphic novel that explores the problematic nature of family and its effects on its creator. Many readers might not be familiar with the inner workings of Joyce's pre-postmodern masterpiece, but who really is? Yet, how many people have experienced strained and dysfunctional relationships with their parents? It's no surprise these books continue to garner both critical and popular attention then. Superhero comics are not a thing of the past. They still possess significant amount of potential for academic discourse. However, the works of creators like Bechdel, Ware, and Small provide additional outlets for other voices and for the developing literary canon of comics. Not only are comics able to operate apart from the cape and the suits, but they can also succeed where other mediums, such as conventional literature or cinema, might fall short in engaging their audience. In their approach to these heady discussions, comics can demonstrate the sophistication and nuance expected from high literature while maintaining a certain level of accessibility for casual readers. So again, as we wrap things up, I would challenge you to go back, look at those dividing pictures, and think about the ways in which this graphic novel serves as a form of catharsis for Bechdel, in which she tries to come to find some form of closure, with her father. So anyhow, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Look forward to hearing them. Have a great time.